Chicago never sleeps, and neither do its secrets. Tonight, we pull back the curtain on a marriage built on calculation, a woman dismissed as furniture, and the slow, devastating rise of someone no one saw coming. Settle in. This one runs deep. The wedding cake was white chocolate and raspberry three-tiers, decorated with sugar roses that looked almost real. Nora Callahan noticed details like that, the texture of things, the distance between what something appeared to be and what it actually was. She noticed it now standing in the antechamber of the St. Regis Grand Ballroom, in a dress that cost more than her father had earned in the last 2 years, combined, her hands pressed flat against her stomach to keep them from shaking. The dress was Roman's choice. Everything tonight was Roman's choice. She had not been consulted on the venue, the flowers, the guest list, the music, the menu, or the officiant. She had been handed a schedule 3 days before the ceremony and told to be ready at 6. The only decision she had made for herself in the past 4 months was whether to wear her hair up or down. She wore it up. 11 pins, one small thing that belonged only to her. Through the wall, she could hear the low murmur of 300 guests, the scrape of chairs, the clink of crystal. Chicago's finest had turned out in force. Politicians, financiers, property developers who asked no questions about where their funding originated. Crime figures who had scrubbed themselves clean enough to sit in ballrooms and drink champagne. The Voss name opened every door in the city. It had for 60 years. Tonight it was being handed to a new generation. And this ceremony was not just a wedding, it was a coronation. Nora knew this. She had known it since the afternoon 4 months ago, when Roman Voss had appeared at the door of her father's apartment on the south side, let himself in without knocking, and set a manila envelope on the kitchen table without a word of greeting. Her father Frank had gone pale when he saw it. He sat down without being asked, the way men sit down when they are about to receive a sentence. He did not look at his daughter once while Roman explained the situation in the calm, unhurried tone of a man reading weather reports. Frank Callahan owed the Voss organization $430,000. Gambling debts compounded by loans he had taken to cover the gambling debts, compounded again by interest that had been growing quietly in the dark for 3 years. At that number, the organization typically collected in other ways. There was, however, an alternative. Roman needed a wife, not a partner, not a companion, a wife in the legal and visible sense. Someone who would stand beside him at the ceremony that would formally transfer leadership of the Voss syndicate from his uncle Gerald to himself. The criminal commission that governed Chicago's organized interests required it. Tradition demanded the incoming boss present himself as a man of establishment, of permanence, a family man in the oldest meaning of that phrase. A bachelor ascending to power sent the wrong signal: instability, impermanence. Roman had looked at Nora once during the explanation, a glance so brief it was almost an insult. Then he looked back at her father. The envelope contained the terms: signed by Friday, and Frank's debt was erased. Refuse and Frank would be found in the Chicago River before the following weekend. Nora had been standing in the kitchen doorway with a dish towel still in her hands. She understood in the particular way that women understand things when the men around them pretend the women are not in the room. The decision had already been made. The envelope was a formality. The Friday deadline was theater. She said yes that same afternoon. What she had not told her father, had not told anyone, was that the yes had not required the threat to push it out of her. She would have said it anyway. She had been in love with Roman Voss since she was 19 years old, a fact she had kept buried so deep she had almost convinced herself it was no longer there. Almost. She had met him at a charity gala her father had dragged her to one of the last years when Frank's bookmaking operation had been profitable enough to warrant attending such events. Roman had been 24 already, moving through the room with the particular quality that powerful men develop early, that awareness of space and the expectation that space would yield to them. He had not spoken to her. She had stood near the bar for most of the evening, too aware of her body in the way that heavy women learn to be in rooms full of thin ones, and she had watched him and felt something ignite in her chest that she had no name for at the time. She named it later. In the years that followed, she had cataloged every piece of information about him. She could find the way other people collected stamps or records. She had watched him from the edge of Chicago's social world, the kind of edge where you are present but not quite seen, as he grew into the man her father's associates spoke about with lowered voices in a particular quality of respect that was very close to fear. She told herself it was not love, it was fixation. the dangerous romanticism of a lonely woman who read too many novels. She had argued with herself about it through two failed relationships with perfectly decent men who could not understand why she kept a distance she could not explain. And she had mostly won the argument. And then Roman had walked into her kitchen, and it had started all over again. She had agreed to be his wife, knowing full well what she was agreeing to. She had not deluded herself. She understood that he did not see her, that she was a solution to an administrative problem, that the morning after the ceremony he would return to his life, and she would become a piece of furniture in his mansion. Present, unremarkable, unmoved. She had told herself she could survive that. She had believed this more or less until 40 minutes ago. The antechamber attached to the bridal suite had a heat vent low on the wall, the old cast iron kind that carried sound between rooms like a secret. Nora had been sitting on the small upholstered bench near it, adjusting the strap of her heel for the third time because her hands needed something to do, when she heard Roman's voice from the room on the other side of the wall. He was speaking to someone she did not know by voice, a man with a flat, clipped tone she would later identify as Croft Hensley, one of the organization's operational fixers. They were speaking without caution, the way men spoke when they were certain no one of consequence was listening. The commission wants confirmation of stability, Croft Hensley was saying. Marriage is the most visible signal. I know what it signals. Roman's voice was exactly as she had heard it in her kitchen. Measured, without inflection. The voice of a man for whom most conversations were slightly beneath his attention. The Petrov group specifically. They want to know the new boss is not going to get himself killed in the first 6 months. The theory being that a man with a wife is a man with something to protect. Makes him more careful. A pause. The sound of something being set down on a surface. The theory is not wrong, Roman said. The girl is. A brief hesitation. She is not exactly what anyone expected. No, I mean the commission. The commission can keep their opinions about my wife's appearance to themselves. The words were flat, not defensive. Roman said them the way he might correct a factual error. Without heat, without investment. That is not the point of her. What is the point of her? The silence that followed lasted perhaps 4 seconds. Nora sat on the bench with her shoe in her hands and her heart somewhere behind her sternum, and she waited. She is visible, Roman said finally. She walks into rooms with me. She sits beside me at dinners. She gives the commission what they need to see. If someone with a grudge decides to remove me before I have had time to consolidate, which is a real probability in the first year, a public attack on a married couple is politically messier than a hit on a single man. The wife is a complication they have to calculate, so she is a deterrent, a visible liability that makes me a harder target, a beat. And when the first year is over, that is a conversation for later. Nora heard footsteps, the sound of a door opening and closing. Roman's voice again, speaking to someone new. The content irrelevant now. Just sound. She sat on the bench with her shoe in her hands for a long time. She did not cry. She had expected that she would if something like this ever pierced through the version of events she had constructed for herself. But the thing she felt was not grief. It was more like the feeling you get when you have been holding something very heavy for a very long time and you finally put it down. Not relief exactly, but the recognition of how much the weight had cost you. She put her shoe back on. She stood up. She looked at herself in the small mirror above the vanity table and took a careful inventory. She was 27 years old. She was 5'4" and 240 pounds, and she had her mother's cheekbones and her father's stubborn jaw and hair the color of dark honey that was currently pinned with 11 separate pins into an arrangement the stylist had spent 90 minutes producing. She was wearing a dress that cost $14,000, chosen by a man who had just described her in terms of precise operational logic as a human shield. She looked at herself for a long time. Then she picked up her bouquet, opened the antechamber door, and walked toward the sound of the orchestra tuning up. She married him 45 minutes later. The ceremony was beautiful in the way that expensive things assembled by professionals are always beautiful. The flowers were white and deep burgundy. The candles were real wax. The officiant had a voice designed for cathedrals. The guests were dressed in the particular way of Chicago money, conservative and heavy, jewels real but not ostentatious, dark suits and silk ties. Wealth communicated through quality rather than volume. Roman stood at the altar in a charcoal suit and looked at the doors when she appeared the way grooms were supposed to look. She walked the aisle on her father's arm. Frank in his rented tuxedo, his eyes red at the edges, his hand over hers on his arm, with the grip of a man who understood exactly what he had put his daughter into and could not find the architecture in himself to say so. She kept her eyes on the far wall above Roman's head and moved at a pace that felt neither hurried nor reluctant. When she reached him, he looked at her. The look lasted perhaps 3 seconds. She had spent years constructing elaborate fantasies about the look he would give her if he ever truly saw her. The reality was neither warm nor cruel. It was simply the look of a man confirming that a component had been successfully delivered. He took her hand. His hand was large, dry, and cool. He held hers with exactly the right amount of pressure, firm enough to appear genuine, relaxed enough to be comfortable. He had, she realized, practiced this. Or perhaps for him, it required no practice. Perhaps all of it was simply management. They said their vows. She said hers clearly and without hesitation, because she had decided on the bench in the antechamber that she would not perform distress and she would not collapse into the moment. If she was going to do this, she was going to do it in a way that cost her nothing visible. He kissed her briefly at the officiant's prompt. Dry, businesslike. Over in 2 seconds. The room applauded. She smiled. The reception was long. Roman moved through it with the ease of a man in his natural environment, working the room with the practiced fluency of someone who had attended 1,000 of these events and understood that a room full of powerful people was simply a series of individual calculations. He kept Nora beside him for the first hour during the formal photographs and the introductions to commission members and senior organization figures, during which she was presented and acknowledged and then effectively forgotten. The attention moving past her the way water moves past a stone. She shook hands. She said the right words. She smiled at the right moments. She had not been raised in this world, but she had spent 8 years on its periphery in the company of men like her father who moved through it at the lower levels, and she understood the grammar of it well enough to not embarrass herself. At some point during the second hour, Roman released her. Not literally. He simply stopped including her in the orbits. He moved through, turning slightly away in conversations, not reaching for her hand when the natural moment for it passed. She found herself standing at the edge of things, holding a glass of water she had not wanted, watching the room settle into the configurations that rooms settle into once formality gives way to appetite. That was when she noticed him. A man at a table near the far edge of the ballroom, not near the commission tables, not near the organization figures she had been introduced to. He sat alone in a way that was not the aloneness of someone waiting for their companion to return, but the particular stillness of someone who had chosen exactly this position for exactly this purpose. He was compact, perhaps 52, with a quality of controlled physical economy that reminded her of machinery at rest, not turned off, simply waiting. He was watching Roman, not with the admiration of the other guests, not with the carefully calibrated respect of the commission representatives. He watched Roman the way a surveyor watches a piece of land, assessing distance, identifying boundaries, calculating what it would take to acquire. Nora watched the man for 3 minutes. He did not look at her once. No one at a table like this ever looked at someone like her. She filed his face away with the same automatic precision she filed everything. Dark hair going silver at the temples. A stillness that was not peace but patience. The kind of patience that was indistinguishable from certainty. She did not know his name. She did not need it yet. She noticed Iris Langley at the table near the windows. She had known Iris existed in the abstract way that women in Nora's position know about women in Iris's position, as a fact that sits in the peripheral vision and is carefully not examined. Iris was 30, Italian American, the kind of beautiful that photographers described as architectural, and she was Roman's mistress in the particular way that certain men in certain worlds maintain mistresses. Publicly known, socially present, not spoken of directly. She was in a green dress surrounded by the younger generation of organization figures, and she laughed at something someone said, and the laugh was genuine, and she did not look across the room at the bride even once. Nora watched her for a moment. Then she looked away. She watched Gerald Voss move through the reception with the careful deliberateness of someone managing pain in his joints. He was 63, silver-haired, lean, and he was supposed to be in retirement, handing power gracefully to his nephew. That was the narrative. But Gerald stood still at intervals in a way that did not match the narrative of a man winding down. His hands rested flat on whatever surface was near him during conversations, perfectly motionless while everyone around him gestured and animated. The stillness of a man who already knew what was going to happen next. She noticed that Croft Hensley, the man whose voice she had heard through the vent, positioned himself in a particular corner near the eastern exit at regular intervals. Each time he did, a different man approached him and spoke briefly and then left. She found a chair at a side table near the kitchen entrance and sat in it for the better part of an hour. And during that hour, something began to happen in the quiet architecture of her interior life. It was not dramatic. It did not announce itself. It was more like a slow clarification. The way a camera comes into focus. Not a change in what she was looking at, but a change in how clearly she could see it. She looked at her father at a table near the far wall, making conversation with a man she did not recognize. His rented tuxedo slightly too large in the shoulders. His expression, the particular expression of a man who has made a transaction he knows was wrong and has chosen survival over conscience. She picked up her water glass and finished it. Then she began to pay attention in a different way. She had always been an observer. It was something she had developed early, the particular skill set of a child who was never the loudest or fastest or most visible in any room, who had learned that you could gather more information by listening than by talking, that the people who were never seen were the ones who saw everything. In the rooms her father had moved through, she had absorbed years of operational intelligence without ever intending to. Names, relationships, hierarchies, grudges, debts. She had filed it all without thinking because information was the only currency she had natural access to. Tonight, she extended that attention to the vast social ecosystem with a precision she had not applied before. She returned her gaze to the man at the far table, the compact man with the surveyor's eyes. He had still spoken to no one from the main organization. He existed at the reception the way a splinter exists inside a wound, present, foreign, doing quiet damage. She looked at Gerald Voss across the room and then back at this man and felt the first faint click of something connecting. She did not know yet what she would do with any of it. The night ended at midnight. Roman's driver took them from the hotel to the Voss estate on the North Shore, a 12-acre property surrounded by a 12-foot stone wall with a house that had been built in 1923 and expanded 3 times since, a monument in pale limestone and dark wood that managed to feel simultaneously luxurious and institutional. Roman sat beside her in the back of the car and checked his phone for most of the drive. He made 2 calls, both brief, both operational. He did not touch her. When they arrived, Ren, the housekeeper, a compact woman in her 50s who gave nothing away, in her expression showed Nora to her room. Her room, not their room. A suite on the east wing away from the master suite with a connecting hallway that had a door at either end. Ren showed her the closets and the bathroom in the small sitting room with a professional thoroughness that communicated clearly that this arrangement was neither surprising nor new to her. "Is there anything you need tonight, Mrs. Voss?" Ren asked. The name landed like a stone into still water. Nora watched the ripples for a moment. "I am fine," she said. "Thank you." Ren left. Nora stood in the center of a room that was beautiful and entirely alien, in a dress that had cost $14,000. She found the 11 pins in her hair. She removed them one by one and set them on the vanity table in a row. Then she sat in the chair and looked at the window where Lake Michigan was visible through the bare October trees, dark and flat under a moonless sky. A disposable body meant to stand between him and a bullet. She sat with Matt for a long time and tested whether what she felt was what she had expected to feel. The honest answer was complicated. There was still something in her that wanted to reconstruct the explanation, find the angle from which his words became something other than what they were. She recognized this as the particular exhausting dishonesty of people who love the wrong thing too long. She had done it for 8 years, and it had cost her a specific kind of exhaustion that she had not named until tonight. But beneath that, underneath the reflex toward reconstruction, there was something new. Something that had not been there before she sat down on that bench. A stillness, not peace, not acceptance. Something colder and more functional than either of those. She had been brought here to be visible, to be a deterrent, to absorb the risk that would otherwise fall entirely on him. She had been selected for this role not despite her ordinariness, but because of it. Because a quiet, plus-size, socially unremarkable woman was the kind of wife who generated no rivalries and no attention, who could be positioned like furniture and ignored until needed. Fine. She had spent 27 years being ignored in rooms. She knew how to be invisible. She also knew in the steady, practical way that observers know things that invisibility was not the same as powerlessness, that the most dangerous position in any ecosystem was the one that everyone dismissed. She did not make any decisions that night. She was too tired and too honest to make decisions in the dark, with her hair loose and her shoes off, and the weight of the day sitting on her shoulders like a physical thing. But she made one small resolution. She would stop filtering what she saw. She would see this house and this man and this world exactly as they were, without the lens of what she had wanted them to be. She slept on top of the covers, still in her dress. In the morning, the first thing she did was take stock. The weeks that followed established the structure of her new life with the mechanical regularity of a system running itself. She ate breakfast alone in the East Wing's small dining room. She attended the dinners and appearances and charity events that her new position required, which amounted to perhaps 3 social obligations per week. She wore the clothes selected by an image consultant named Sylvie, who materialized twice a month with racks of appropriate things, and the diplomatic tact of someone paid to dress women whose husbands had opinions about presentation. She and Roman occupied the same house the way 2 streams occupied the same valley, occasionally visible to each other, flowing in the same direction, never touching. She discovered, extraordinarily disciplined. He woke at 5. He exercised alone in the basement gym. He worked from a home office until 9, when he left for a building in the financial district that served as the legitimate face of Voss interest. He returned between 6 and 8 in the evening, ate dinner either alone or with operational staff, and retired to his section of the house well before midnight. He spoke to her at the social events they attended together, where he was precisely appropriate, attentive enough to appear convincing, distant enough to communicate that the appearance was performance. In private, they shared perhaps 30 words a day. Good morning, the car's at 7. Dinner at 8 if you are available. She was always available. She had nothing else to be available for. She used the time. The estate's library was substantial and unlocked, and she spent her mornings in it with the thoroughness of a woman with nowhere to be and a particular kind of hunger. She read financial texts, corporate law, logistics, supply chain management. She had a business degree from a state university that she had never used for anything because her father's declining fortunes had pulled her sideways into supporting him. And she had forgotten, until she sat alone in that library, how much she had enjoyed the mechanics of commerce, the way systems connected, the way money moved through structures, the way legitimate and illegitimate economies mirrored each other in their fundamental logic. She also listened. The estate was full of movement, staff, operational figures. The constant low-frequency activity of an organization that ran through the house, the way electricity ran through wiring, present in everything, visible in nothing. She learned the patterns. She learned which rooms the conversations happened in and where the dead acoustic zones were, and how to position herself in corridors in ways that made her seem to be heading somewhere while actually being very still. She was not gathering intelligence with any particular intention. She was doing what she had always done, noticing, storing, keeping the raw material without yet knowing what she would build from it. It was in the 3rd week that she first heard the name. She had been in the library, the door slightly open, when 2 men she recognized as mid-level organization figures passed in the corridor outside. The conversation was brief. Something about a shipment, a schedule, a contact, and then one of them said Draken. She had heard the word before at the wedding in a conversation Roman had handled with particular care with a commission representative. But the way these men in the corridor said it was different, not with the caution of legitimate business, with the particular flatness of operational language, the shorthand of men discussing arrangements that were already made. And immediately after the name Draken, one of them said Gerald. She sat in the library and turned a page she did not read and thought about this. Over the following 2 weeks, she heard the name Draken 4 more times, each time in a context that would have been invisible to someone who had not been paying attention. Each time in association with arrangements or logistics that were being handled separately from the organization's main operations. and each time she cross-referenced it with what she could observe of Gerald's behavior. Gerald Voss was supposed to be in retirement, a man of 63 who had built the organization over 4 decades and was now handing power gracefully to his nephew. That was the narrative. The reality was different. Gerald moved through the estate with a restless energy that did not match the narrative of a man winding down. His conversations with certain staff members stopped abruptly when others entered rooms. He made calls from the guest house rather than the main building. He used logistics channels that ran parallel to the organization's standard operations channels that Nora had identified by the gaps they left in the paper trail she was quietly learning to read. And then she remembered the man at the reception, the compact man with the surveyor's eyes at the table on the periphery of the ballroom, the man who had watched Roman the way you watch something you are planning to take apart. She had filed his face away that night. Now she took it out and examined it against everything she had learned in the past 6 weeks. That man was not a commission contact. She was certain of it. He did not have the particular bearing of American organized crime. He had something different, something Eastern European, in the economy of his movement, the quality of his patience. She had read enough in the past weeks to understand what that meant in the context of a Chicago power transfer. Draken was not a commission contact. Draken was an Eastern European syndicate that had been trying to establish a foothold in Chicago's shipping infrastructure for 3 years. She knew this because she had read it in a summary document left on the kitchen table by a staff member who had assumed she would not know what she was looking at. She knew what she was looking at. And now she knew that Gerald Voss had been in contact with them for at least 6 weeks through intermediaries, that Roman's irregular operational oversight would not catch, using channels that ran parallel to the organization's standard logistics. The man at the wedding reception had been Victor Drayle, the operational head of Dracon present at the coronation of the man he was planning to remove. She did not know the timeline. She did not know the mechanism, but she knew the shape of it. An ambush, an execution dressed as a turf dispute, executed by Drayle's people using Gerald's inside information about his nephew's movements and schedule, leaving Gerald to step back into the power vacuum with clean hands and a grieving face and the sympathy of an organization that would never know. She wrote everything into the small notebook she had found in the library. Dates, contexts, names, behavioral observations. The name Victor Drayle written in the margin with a question mark and then without one. She thought about going to Roman. She constructed that conversation in her head and found it immediately and comprehensively implausible. She could hear his voice through the vent with perfect clarity, the brisk economy of his assessment. She understood that arriving at his office with a theory built from overheard fragments in the behavior of his uncle's hands would be received as exactly what he would expect from her. The anxious meddling of a woman with too much time and too little standing. She thought about saying nothing. This was the easier option. She had been brought here to be visible and quiet, and she could simply continue being both. But the information sat in her chest like something with weight. And she had always been honest with herself, even when the honesty was inconvenient. The honest truth was that whatever she felt about the man she had married, she did not want him dead. Not for his sake. Not yet. She told herself that clearly and without sentiment. She did not want him dead because she was not done here yet. Because this situation was not finished resolving itself. Because she had not yet arrived at the place she was moving toward, and she could not see that place from here. But she knew with the deep certainty of someone who had spent a long time being underestimated that it existed. She chose to tell him. She went to his office on a Tuesday evening in the 6th week of their marriage. He was at his desk jacket, off sleeves rolled to the elbows, working through documents with the focused efficiency of a man who treated time as a finite and precious resource. He looked up when she knocked. The look was neutral, not unwelcoming, not warm. The look of a man being interrupted by a thing he had temporarily forgotten existed. "I need to talk to you about Gerald," she said. She stood in the doorway and laid it out. She gave him the specific instances, the conversations, the dates, the context. She told him the name Draken. She told him about Gerald's stillness at the reception, the particular quality of a man in the posture of waiting. She told him about the man at the table on the periphery of the ballroom, a compact watching patient in the way of someone who had already decided. She told him she had no evidence, only observed patterns, and that she understood the limitations of what she was offering. She was careful and precise. She kept her voice level throughout because She had learned young that women who brought difficult information with any emotion attached to it were dismissed on the basis of the emotion rather than engaged on the basis of the information. Roman listened. She finished. He was quiet for a moment, looking at her with an expression she had not seen from him before. Not the administrative assessment of the altar, not the practiced politeness of social events. Something attentive and slightly recalibrated, as if she had said something that required him to adjust the setting he had her on. Then the moment passed. "You have been listening to conversations that are not yours," he said. "Not a question." "Yes, through vents and cracked doors. And from this you have constructed a theory about my uncle's intentions." She met his eyes. "Yes." He looked at her for another moment. "Gerald built this organization over 40 years. He is the reason there is anything to inherit. His loyalty to this family is not something I need to be concerned about." "I am not telling you what to be concerned about," Nora said. "I am telling you what I heard and what I observed. What you do with it is your decision." He held her gaze for a moment that stretched past comfortable. "Thank you," he said finally, in a tone that was not grateful. It was dismissive in the specific polished way of powerful men who had learned to make dismissal sound like courtesy. "Is there anything else?" "No," she said. "That is everything." She went back to the east wing. She sat in her chair by the window. The lake was dark and flat, exactly as it had been on her wedding night. She made no dramatic resolutions. She did not rage or weep. She simply sat and understood with cold and growing clarity exactly what she was dealing with. He had heard her. He had assessed her. He had concluded she was not a credible source, not because of what she had said, but because of what she was. Invisible. Unremarkable. The furniture he had positioned in his house for reasons of operational utility. She had forgotten her function and tried to participate in something above her assigned role, and he had corrected her with the efficient courtesy of a man who had no reason to be cruel because cruelty required investment. She sat with that. Then she made a decision, not about him, not about the marriage, not about what she felt or did not feel or had stopped feeling or never stopped feeling. A simpler decision closer to the ground. She was not going to be invisible anymore. Not in the way she had been. She was going to be invisible differently. The way a weapon is invisible when it is sheathed. The way a current is invisible beneath still water. She was going to pay attention to everything. She was going to learn this world the way she had learned everything in her life that had mattered. Slowly, thoroughly, from the outside in, without anyone noticing that she was doing it. And she was going to trust her own observations. Not because she was certain she was right about Gerald. She might be wrong. She had no way to know yet. But she had been in rooms her entire life where people like her, women like her, heavy and quiet and presumed harmless, were spoken around rather than spoken to. She had absorbed more in those rooms than the people speaking had ever imagined. She knew how to read the text beneath the text. She had been reading it since she was 12 years old. She was done waiting to be proven right. The next morning she woke at 4:30, an hour before Roman's alarm, and sat at the small desk in her sitting room and began to write down everything she had heard and observed in the past 6 weeks, organized by date and context and the names of everyone she could identify. She wrote in longhand in the notebook, small and dense. And when she was finished, she read it back to herself and understood that she was looking at something real. She knew the shape of the threat. She knew Gerald's role. She knew the man at the wedding reception had been no accident. And she knew that Roman Voss, the man who had married her as a human shield, the man who had described her to his fixer as a deterrent and a liability, the man who had dismissed her information with the polite efficiency of a man taking out the trash, was walking without knowing it towards something that had been designed for him by the one person in the organization he had never thought to doubt. She held the notebook in both hands and thought about what that meant. She thought about the woman who had stood in front of the mirror in the antechamber and taken inventory. The $14,000 dress, the 11 pins, the 8 years. She thought about what it would cost her to act on what she knew and what it would cost her to stay silent. There was no version of this that was simple. There was no calculation that resolved cleanly in her favor regardless of what she chose. She was inside this situation now fully and irrevocably, and the only question that remained was what kind of person she was going to be inside it. She closed the notebook. She set it on the desk. She looked at the window where the lake was just becoming visible in the first gray light of a November morning, flat and cold and very large. She had 11 more days before she found out exactly how little time was left. She found out on a Thursday evening in the third week of November. She had been in the laundry room off the kitchen, ostensibly retrieving a cardigan she had left there that morning, when she heard Gerald's voice in the adjoining mudroom. The door was 4 inches open. She stood very still with the cardigan in her hands and did not breathe. One sentence, one date, one location. The shipping docks at the east end of the lakefront. Friday, midnight. She went back to her room and sat very still for a long time. 41 hours. She thought about going to Roman again. She sat with that image for several minutes. Herself at his office door, again the same information delivered with greater urgency, the same polished dismissal arriving in the same measured tone, the same 3 seconds of assessment before the courtesy closed back over his face like water over a stone. No, she had already given him the information. She had given it clearly and precisely and without emotion, and he had chosen the category she belonged to over the content of what she had said. Going back with more of the same would produce more of the same. She thought about going to someone else in the organization, someone with standing, operational credibility, someone who would be listened to, but she had made no alliances in 6 weeks. She had been invisible in exactly the way she had been placed here to be invisible, and there was no one she could trust, and she knew it. She thought about calling the police and dismissed it immediately, not out of loyalty to the Voss operation, but because introducing law enforcement into this would create a disruption so total that the east wing of the estate would be the least of her problems. Everything would collapse at once, and she would be expelled from the wreckage with nothing, having spent 6 weeks learning the grammar of a world that would then lock its doors to her permanently. She sat for a long time. Then she made the only decision that was left. She would go to the docks. She did not have a plan in the way that plans required specificity and preparation and resources she did not have. She had a location and a time, and the raw, unorganized truth that she was not going to sit in the east wing and stare at the lake while the situation resolved itself over her head. She would figure out the rest when she got there. She spent the next 39 hours preparing in the only ways available to her. She studied the dock's layout from historical records she found in the estate's library, old shipping manifests, and facility maps filed in a cabinet no one had opened in years. She slept as much as she could. She ate carefully. She wrote in the small notebook everything she knew so that if something went wrong, the information would exist somewhere independent of her. On Friday, she put the notebook behind a copy of a logistics manual on the library's lowest shelf. She dressed in dark clothes from the back of her closet. She took $300 from the household account she had been given access to for incidentals and did not think about the implications. She ordered a car service from a number she found online, not the estate's usual service. She left at 11 through the east wing side entrance, which opened onto the garden path that led to the secondary gate. She had never used this exit before. She was not sure anyone knew she knew it existed. The car took her south along the lake. The night was cold. November in Chicago was a particular kind of cold, not the wet cold of coastal cities, but the cutting cold of a place the wind came through without apology. She sat in the back of the car and watched the city pass and felt very clearly and without drama the simple fact that she had no idea if she would be in this car going home in 2 hours or if she would be something else entirely. She was frightened. She recognized the fear as useful information and set it aside. The driver let her out 3 blocks from the dock entrance. She paid cash, told him not to wait, and stood on the sidewalk while the car disappeared and the city noise settled around her like water. Then she walked toward the lake. The shipping docks at the east lakefront were a working industrial area open 24 hours but minimally staffed at midnight, the kind of place where the darkness had texture. Stacked containers, cranes standing still against the sky, the smell of rust and diesel and cold water. The lights were high and sparse, throwing long shadows between the stacks. She moved along the perimeter, keeping to the shadows with the instinct of someone who had spent a lifetime not drawing attention. She found a position between 2 containers with a clear line of sight to the central loading area, where the dock's main road widened into an open space roughly the size of a basketball court. She waited. At 11:52, she heard the vehicles. Three black SUVs came in from the south entrance, with their headlights off, moving slowly. Roman's convoy, the kind he used for meetings that required discretion. She could see the shape of the man in the lead vehicle's passenger seat, and even at this distance through the dark, she knew the set of those shoulders. At 11:59, she heard the second set of engines. They came from three directions simultaneously. Four vans without markings, sealing the exits in sequence with the mechanical precision of something that had been rehearsed many times in the planning and perhaps once or twice in practice. She watched them position themselves and understood immediately and completely that the trap was exactly what she had theorized. At 12:01, the shooting started. The first shots came from the container stacks on the west side. Sniper positions she understood placed to suppress response while the vans closed in. She heard Roman security responding, heard the sharp, organized return fire of people who had been trained for exactly this and still had not been trained enough to anticipate the geometry of it. She tracked the fight by sound while she tracked the space by sight. She saw him. He had gotten out of the lead vehicle when the shooting started. Wrong instinct, she thought, watching him move along the north side of his convoy toward the cover of a container stack. One security figure beside him and another already down. He was moving with the controlled urgency of someone who understood the situation but had not yet mapped the full shape of it. She saw the gunman on the east container roof a full 2 seconds before the gunman had his angle. She had not planned this. There was no plan. There was only the specific physical reality of where she was standing and where Roman was and where the gunman was and the distance between them and what could be covered in the time available. She ran, not toward Roman, toward the east container stack's base, angling to cross the gunman's line of sight before the shot fired. She did not scream. She did not announce herself. She simply moved with the single-minded efficiency of someone who had stopped calculating risk because the calculation was already complete. She saw the muzzle flash before she felt anything. Then she felt everything. She hit the ground and understood from the quality of the pain that she had been hit at least once, possibly twice in the left side and the left shoulder. She registered this information with the detached precision of someone in shock and noted that she was still conscious, which she understood was important. She heard the gunman fall, Roman's security finally having the angle. She heard shouting. She heard Roman's voice closer than expected, saying words she could not separate from the ringing in her ears. She lay on the cold concrete of the dock with the lake wind on her face and looked up at the sky, which was dark and without stars, the clouds low and thick over the city. She thought with perfect clarity, he is not going to understand this. She thought that is all right. She thought I need to leave. She did not know how this was possible. She was bleeding on the ground with 2 gunshot wounds, and her left arm was not responding to instructions. But the thought was clear and urgent and felt like the most important thought she had had in 6 weeks of marriage to a man who had described her as disposable. She was not going to be here when he reached her. She found her right hand on the cold concrete. She found leverage. She thought about all the times in her life she had been told in various ways that she was not the kind of person things happened to. She thought about the wedding ring on her finger. She pulled it off with fingers that were slippery and cold, and she set it on the concrete where she had been lying. Then she used the container wall and everything she had left to get to her feet, and she moved toward the water, toward the narrow service corridor she had noted on her way in, and she disappeared into the dark. Behind her, she heard Roman's voice saying her name for the first time. Just her name. Nothing else. She kept moving. The service corridor ran 40 yards south before it opened onto a maintenance road that paralleled the dock's perimeter fence. She moved along it with her right hand against the wall for balance and her left arm pressed against her side, and she thought about nothing except the next 10 feet of ground. Her left shoulder had stopped feeling like a shoulder. It felt like a separate object attached to her body by increasingly unreliable means. The wound in her left side lower below the ribs was the one that worried her more. It was wet in a way her coat was not thick enough to hide. There was a payphone on the corner of a side street 2 blocks from the dock's south gate. She had seen it from the car on the way in and filed it away. She reached it in 11 minutes. It took her 4 attempts to dial because her right hand was shaking in a way she could not entirely control. Frank picked up on the 3rd ring, his voice rough with sleep, and then instantly not rough at all when he heard her say his name. She said, "I need you to come get me, and I need you to not ask me anything until we are in the car, corner of Lakeshore and Meridian. There is a pawn shop with a green sign. I will be in the doorway. A silence that lasted 1 second. 20 minutes, he said. He made it in 17. She watched the headlights of his 20-year-old Buick come around the corner and felt something in her chest shift in a way that had nothing to do with the wounds. She pressed it back down because this was not the moment for it. He saw her when he got out of the car, and his face did something she had seen it do only twice before in her life. Once when her mother died, and once when a man twice his size had put a gun to his head in a parking garage years ago. He crossed the space between them in 4 steps and caught her by the right arm when her knees decided they had done enough. No hospital, she said immediately. They will report it, and then there are questions. You know someone. You have always known someone. He looked at her for a moment with an expression that contained more guilt than she had the patience for right now. Get in the car, he said. The man Frank drove her to was named Doc Raines, and he worked out of an apartment in Bridgeport with the kind of organized calm of someone who had been doing this long enough to have developed systems. He was 60, stocky, with hands that moved with a steadiness that had nothing to do with emotion. He cut away her coat and her shirt and examined her wounds under a light bright enough to make her squint. 2, he said. The shoulder is through and through, missed the joint, missed the subclavian. Lucky. He pressed something against the side wound, and she made a sound she had not intended to make. This one is still in there, going to need to come out tonight. Then take it out tonight, she said. He looked at her over the top of the light with the expression of a man recalibrating. You want something for the pain first, obviously, she said. Frank sat in Doc Raines' kitchen while the work was done, and she could see him through the doorway sitting at the table with his hands around a cup of coffee. He was not drinking. His head bent slightly, his shoulders carrying the particular weight of a man doing the arithmetic on his choices. She watched him through the half-open door while Doc Raines did what needed to be done, and she kept her breathing steady and her eyes open because she was afraid that if she closed them, the arithmetic would become her arithmetic, and she was not ready for that yet. When it was done and she was bandaged and dressed in a clean shirt from Doc Raines' supply of anonymous clothing, she sat on the edge of the exam table and told herself this was the worst she would feel, that from this point forward, the direction was up. She told herself this with the focused, slightly desperate conviction of someone who needed to believe it to function. Doc Raines stood in the doorway and looked at her with the professional detachment of a man who had learned not to ask questions. Then he said, whoever you belong to is going to come looking. I do not belong to anyone, she said. He looked at her. He is going to come looking for me, she corrected. I know. She spent 4 days in her father's apartment on the south side. Doc Raines came twice to change the dressings. Frank brought her soup and medicine and did not ask questions with his mouth, only with his eyes constantly, in a way she answered by not dying. On the second day, Roman called Frank's phone. Frank brought it to her without a word and stood in the doorway while she looked at the screen. She let it ring. When it stopped, she handed the phone back, and Frank put it in his pocket and went back to the kitchen. And that was the entirety of the conversation between them about it. On the 4th day, she could sit up without the room shifting. On the 5th day, she called Frank in from the kitchen and had him sit across from her at the small table where she had eaten 1,000 meals in the years after her mother was gone, where the table's surface still had the mark from the hot pot her mother had set directly on the wood in the last summer before everything went wrong. I need money, she said, whatever you have. He looked at his hands. How much is whatever? Everything? All of it. His jaw tightened. He was quiet for a moment. She said, I am not asking you to explain yourself about any of it. I know what happened. I know how we got here. I am not interested in the history right now. I need to know how much you actually have. He named a number. It was small. She had expected smaller. Okay, she said. Where are you going? He asked. She looked at him. He was 61 years old and he looked older. The particular aging of men who had lived at the edge of things too long, who had made too many transactions in the dark and spent too many years carrying the weight of them. She had his jaw, the stubborn geometry of it. She had always been grateful for that. Somewhere I can work, she said. He nodded slowly. Then he said, I am sorry, and stopped, because the rest of it did not have words that were adequate to the situation, and he knew it, and she knew it. I know, she said. It is all right. It is not entirely true. but it is true enough for now. She left Chicago on a Tuesday morning in early February, 6 weeks after the wedding, 7 days after the docks. She took a bus because she was not ready to put her name on a plane ticket. She sat in the window seat for 14 hours and watched the country change and thought about the notebook behind the logistics manual in the Voss Estate Library and hoped no one found it before it became irrelevant. In the third week of March, from a furnished room in Seattle, she called Petra Sinclair, a former classmate from her business degree program who had gone into logistics consulting and who had, over the years of their loose and infrequent friendship, occasionally described her work in a way that made it sound like the kind of thing that could be done from anywhere by someone who understood how supply chains actually worked versus how they were supposed to work. Petra answered on the second ring. "I heard something happen," she said with the particular neutrality of someone who has been waiting for a call without knowing they were waiting. "I need a project," Nora said. "Something I can work into something real." A pause. "Are you okay?" "I will be." That is a different answer than yes, I know. Petra was quiet for a moment. "I have a client, mid-size freight operation trying to renegotiate their Pacific Northwest port contracts. They need someone who can read the structure of what they currently have and figure out where the losses are coming from. It is not glamorous. That is fine. It pays in the range of. That is also fine." Another pause. "When can you start?" "Whenever you need me to." That was March. By June, she had found 3 structural inefficiencies in the freight company's routing contracts that their own logistics team had missed for 2 years. The money they saved in the first quarter was enough to justify a full-time consulting position that paid twice what the initial project had offered. By September, she had 2 additional clients through referrals. By December, she had incorporated a small firm under the name Hartwell Logistics Consulting, Vivian Hartwell, proprietor, a name she had chosen from the middle pages of a novel she had been reading in February in the furnished room when the need for a name had become practical. She was not hiding exactly. She was condensing. She was becoming smaller and more precise and more functional, the way a thing becomes when it is under pressure and is made of the right material. She was also watching. Back in Chicago, she tracked the aftermath through the channels available to her. Financial filings, news coverage of the kind that appeared between the lines of legitimate reporting. The occasional piece of information that made its way through the network of people who moved around the edges of the organized world and talked to each other in the careful coded way of people who understood that information was currency. She learned that Gerald Voss had been exposed within 48 hours of the dock ambush, not by Roman's investigation, but by the ambush's failure itself. The Draken Group, furious at the botched operation, had made contact with a commission intermediary and attempted to renegotiate their arrangement with a different Voss figure, which had been precisely the wrong move and had served as a comprehensive confession. Gerald was gone from the estate by the end of January. She heard nothing about what happened to him after that and did not ask. She did not need to. She had been in enough rooms to understand that men who designed executions for their own blood did not retire to comfortable silences. The organization had 40 years of memory. Gerald Voss had spent all of it earning exactly the kind of loyalty that does not forget. She learned that Roman had survived the docks without serious injury. She processed this information with the same neutral efficiency she applied to everything else and did not examine it more closely than that. She heard in the spring that he had been looking for her, not through official channels, no police report, no public appeal. Discreet inquiries through the network her father moved in. A significant amount of money offered for information about her location. Frank told her this on a phone call in April, his voice careful, waiting for her reaction. "How much?" she said. He told her. She was quiet for a moment. "Do not take it," she said. "I am not going to." "I know you are not. I am saying it anyway." She heard him exhale. "He is not going to stop. He can keep looking," she said. "That is his business." Frank paused. Then he said, "The man who came to see me, he said Roman seemed like something was wrong with him. Not in a dangerous way. He said he seemed like a man who had lost something and did not know how to look for it the right way." Nora sat in her office in Seattle and looked at the water. "Right," she said. "That is not my problem." She said it the way you say a thing when you are still deciding whether it is true. She kept working. She kept building. She hired people who, were good at specific things and paid them well and gave them enough structure to work within and enough autonomy to exceed expectations. And the firm grew in the particular way that good operations grow, not explosively, but steadily. Each quarter slightly larger than the last, each new client slightly more significant. She kept learning. The freight work had given her a comprehensive education in the mechanics of logistics, how goods moved, how documentation worked, how the gap between what a shipment was listed as and what it actually contained could be managed and exploited. She understood from her years of ambient absorption in the Voss estate that the mechanics of legitimate logistics and the mechanics of illegitimate ones were in most respects identical. The difference was in what moved and who knew it was moving. She began in the second year to look at the Voss organization's legitimate business infrastructure with the focused attention of someone who had decided it was time to stop watching and start doing. It was meticulous work. It required patience and precision and the specific kind of intelligence that understood corporate structures not as abstract entities, but as physical systems, where the load-bearing walls were, where the redundancies existed, where the vulnerabilities accumulated in the places no one thought to look, because the places no one thought to look were the places that the people who had built the structure had also stopped looking at. She was good at it. She discovered exceptionally good at it in the way that people are sometimes exceptionally good at things they have spent years preparing for without knowing they were preparing. She found the first company in the third month of looking, a property holding group that processed Voss profits through residential development on the north side. She acquired a controlling interest through 3 layers of holding companies over the course of 6 months, moving slowly, buying in quantities that did not trigger reporting thresholds. When the transfer was complete, she sat in her office and looked at the documentation and understood that she had just taken from Roman Voss a piece of infrastructure that had been generating $2 million a year in clean money. She felt nothing dramatic about this. She felt the particular satisfaction of a calculation that had resolved correctly. She found the second company 3 months after that, then the third. And then in April of the second year on a Wednesday morning, when the sky over Seattle was the particular gray of a city that had not decided whether it was going to rain, she noticed the man outside her building. He was there on Wednesday. On Thursday, he was across the street in a different position. On Friday, he was gone, and a different man was in his place, which told her this was not one person's surveillance, but a rotation which told her it was organized, which told her it was not casual. She watched them for 3 days without changing her routine or giving any outward sign that she had noticed anything, because the only advantage in a surveillance situation belonged to the person who knew they were being watched, while the watchers believed they were not. These were not Roman's people. She was certain of it. Roman's people would have found her months ago if they had known where to look, and their approach would have been different, more direct, more certain of what they were looking for. These men had the particular quality of people who were gathering information rather than acting on it, assessing something they had identified but not yet fully understood. She thought about the acquisition activity and understood. Hartwell Logistics had been buying into assets connected to Voss infrastructure. To anyone tracking the movement of those assets without knowing who Vivian Hartwell was, this would look like a competitor or a hostile acquisition firm moving quietly into Voss territory. Victor Draley's people were not looking for Nora Callahan. They were looking at Hartwell Logistics and trying to understand what it was. She did not run. Running was the wrong response. Running confirmed suspicion and created new vulnerabilities and required her to abandon the structure she had spent 14 months building. Instead, she spent 3 days mapping the surveillance pattern with the same methodical attention she had applied to the Voss estate in October. Then she adjusted her schedule in ways that moved the rotating team through a series of positions she had pre-selected for their camera coverage. The building on 5th had cameras at the northeast and southwest corners. The parking structure on Commerce had 4 interior cameras and 2 exterior. The coffee place on 4th, where she sometimes worked in the mornings, had a camera above the counter pointed directly at the window seating. By Friday evening, she had footage of 2 of the 3 men in positions that clearly documented their surveillance activity. She sent the files to her lawyer in Vancouver encrypted with a note that described what they were and when to use them. Then she went home and made dinner and did not think about it further because there was nothing further to think about. The documentation existed. The men did not know the documentation existed. That asymmetry was sufficient for the moment. But she understood now with a clarity she had not had before that what she was building was not invisible to everyone. Drell's organization had been trying to establish in Chicago for 3 years. Her acquisition activity was creating patterns in the financial infrastructure that were visible to anyone paying close enough attention, and Drell paid close attention. He did not yet know what he was looking at, but he would eventually. The work she was doing would not stay quiet forever. She began that week to build what she called, internally, the contingency architecture. She told her staff it was an emergency protocol standard for a firm of their size working with clients in regulated industries. She designed the code 7 procedure, a full office evacuation routing through the east stairwell to the street-level exit on Commerce with a prearranged car service standing by during business hours. She ran the procedure twice with her 6-person team in the first week of May, framed as routine safety compliance. Her staff executed it without complaint and without particular curiosity because she had built a team of people who trusted the structure she gave them and did not require elaborate explanations for reasonable precautions. She also retained the Vancouver lawyer to prepare 2 specific documents. One was a divorce decree, complete and ready for signatures. The other was an asset transfer confirming the 19 acquisitions as legitimate and waiving any Voss claim against Hartwell Logistics and its subsidiaries. She put both documents in a folder and put the folder in the bottom right drawer of her desk. By the end of the 2nd year, she had acquired 17 entities. In January of the 3rd year, she moved on 2 more. The last 2 cleared escrow on a Tuesday in early March, which meant that by the morning Roman Voss arrived in Seattle, she held 19 separate entities connected to the Voss financial network with a combined annual cash flow representing roughly 30% of the organization's legitimate revenue. And still he had not found her. She had been careful. But she had also been helped, she understood, by something she had identified in the Voss organization structure during her months in the estate. The particular blind spot of powerful men who built systems around the assumption that the people who could not see them also could not affect them. Roman was looking for Nora Callahan, the Southside bookmaker's daughter, the quiet woman in the East Wing, the human shield in the $14,000 dress. He was not looking in boardrooms and acquisition filings in the quiet, patient demolition of his financial infrastructure by someone who had learned his world from the inside out and had spent 2 years building the tools to take it apart. She had been invisible her whole life. She had decided to use that one last time and then never again. In the spring of the 3rd year, she got a call from Petra Sinclair. "Not about work. Someone has been asking about you," Petra said. Her voice had a quality that was not quite warning, but was close, not with your real name. But the description is specific enough that I knew. "What kind of asking?" "Careful asking. The kind that knows how not to look like asking." A pause. "It is someone from Chicago." Nora set down the pen she had been holding and looked at Puget Sound through the window. "I know," she said. "You knew." "I knew he would find it eventually," she breathed once. "How close is he?" "Close enough that I thought you should know before he arrives." She sat for a moment. She thought about the documentation she had compiled over 2 years, the ownership transfers, the acquisition records, the 2 documents in the bottom right drawer. She thought about the contingency architecture and the Code 7 procedure and the Vancouver lawyer and the 6 people outside her office door who called her Ms. Hartwell and who did not know anything about her except what she had given them. She thought about Roman's voice at the docks, saying her name in the dark after she was gone. She had thought about that voice more than she intended to. She had examined it from every angle and never fully resolved it into something that fit neatly into the structure she had built around herself. It was a loose thread. She had made peace with the fact that some loose threads did not come out cleanly and simply had to be carried. The structure was not built around what she felt. It was built around what she had decided on a bench in an antechamber in a white dress, with the sound of her husband's voice coming through a heating vent, describing her function in his life, with the casual precision of a man discussing weather. She had decided something in that moment that she had been executing for 3 years. The execution was nearly complete. "Tell him I am in Seattle," she said. Petra went quiet. "Tell him exactly where to find me. Give him the address of the office." "Nora, I am ready," she said. "I have been ready." She hung up and looked at the sound and thought about what was coming. She thought about the woman who had stood in front of the mirror in the antechamber and taken inventory, who had removed 11 pins from her hair and sat alone in a room that was not hers, with a wedding ring on her finger, and the specific exhausting weight of having loved the wrong thing for too long. That woman was not entirely gone. She was still in here somewhere, in the part that had noticed the sound of her name and his voice at the docks and had not been able to entirely metabolize it. She was still carrying what she was always going to carry, but she was no longer in charge. Vivian Hartwell pulled the two documents from the bottom right drawer of her desk. She set them side by side on the surface and looked at them for a moment. Clean paper, precise language. The legal architecture of an ending that had been 3 years in construction. She put them in the folder she had prepared for this. She closed the folder. Then she went back to work, because there were 3 more things she needed to finish before he arrived, and Nora Callahan had never left anything half done in her life. He arrived on a Thursday. She knew before her assistant told her. The slight shift in the quality of attention from the reception desk below. The particular silence that preceded the elevator announcement. She was standing at the window with her coffee when Nora's voice came through the intercom with the careful neutrality of someone delivering information they understood was significant without knowing why. "Ms. Hartwell, there is a man downstairs who does not have an appointment. He says his name is Roman Voss and that you are expecting him." Nora looked at Puget Sound. The water was gray this morning, flat and without definition, the sky and the surface almost the same color. "Send him up," she said. She set her coffee down. She moved to her desk and sat in her chair. Her chair, the one she had chosen herself from a showroom on Pine Street, high-backed and precise. The chair of a woman who had decided what kind of space she occupied. She opened the folder and placed both documents on the desk surface, the divorce decree on the left and the asset transfer on the right, and she set her hands flat on the desk on either side of them and waited. The elevator opened at 9:03. He looked the same. That was the first thing she registered, with the involuntary, almost clinical precision of someone who had prepared for this moment and was now discovering the distance between preparation and reality. He looked the same and also different in the way that 3 years always change people. He was leaner. There were lines at the corners of his eyes that she did not remember. His hair was slightly longer. He wore a charcoal coat over a dark suit, no tie. He looked like a man who had dressed for a meeting he expected to be difficult. He stopped when he saw her. She watched him take in the office, the 8th floor view, the clean lines of a space that communicated competence and scale without performing it. The 6 staff members visible through the glass wall of the open plan area, moving through their Thursday morning with the organized efficiency of people who trusted the structure they worked in. She watched him read all of this the way he read rooms, with the rapid professional assessment of a man whose survival had always depended on understanding his environment before it understood him. Then he looked at her. "Vivian Hartwell," he said. "That is the name on the door," she said. He crossed the office and sat in the chair across from her desk without being invited, to which she had expected. He sat the way he always sat, with the particular quality of physical authority that some men were simply born with. His hands rested on the arms of the chair, relaxed, which meant he was not relaxed. He looked at the 2 documents on the desk between them. He looked at them for a long time without speaking. "You have been taking my companies," he said, "acquiring legally available equity in entities that were inadequately protected," she said. "Yes, 17 of them, 19. The last 2 cleared escrow on Tuesday." Something moved across his face, not anger. She had expected anger and would have known how to work with anger. This was something more complicated, a recalculation happening in real time. The specific expression of a man who had arrived at a destination and found the geography entirely different from the map. "3 years," he said. "Yes, while I was looking for you, I know." He was quiet for a moment. His eyes moved from the documents to her face and stayed there. She held the look with the steadiness she had spent 3 years building, not because the look did not cost her anything, but because she had decided long ago that the cost was not going to be visible. "The docks," he said. "I am not interested in discussing the docks. I am." "I understand that," she said. "The documents in front of you take precedence." His jaw tightened. It was the first crack in the surface, and she noted it the way she noted everything without reaction as data. You took a bullet for me, he said. I made a tactical decision in the moment, she said. It does not create an obligation, and I am not presenting it as one. Nora, Vivian, she said quietly, precisely in this office. The silence that followed had texture. He looked at her across the desk, across the two documents, across 3 years of distance, and she could see him working through something, turning it over, trying to find the angle that gave him purchase. Sign the documents, she said. Both of them. The divorce decree, first, then the asset transfer. The transfer confirms the 19 acquisitions as legitimate and waives any claim the Voss organization might make against Hartwell Logistics and its subsidiaries. In exchange, I retain no further claim on Voss assets, and I take no action with the Commission regarding the Gerald incident or anything else I observed during our marriage. He looked at the documents. And if I do not sign, then the package I have prepared, which documents the full financial structure of Voss operations, the Commission relationships, the property holding arrangements, and 3 years of acquisition activity that your accountants failed to flag, goes to the appropriate federal authorities on Monday morning. She held his gaze. I have been very thorough. I had a lot of time. He breathed. She watched his chest move. You would destroy the whole organization, he said. I would hand the documentation to people who would destroy it, she said. The distinction matters to me. Why does the distinction matter to you? She paused for 1 second. Because I am not trying to destroy anything. I am trying to finish something. He looked at her face. This was something stripped down and direct, the look of a man who had run out of the particular kind of performance that power required and was sitting, for possibly the first time, in front of someone he could not manage. I need to know something, he said. His voice had changed, not softer exactly. Still the same fundamental tone, measured and low, but the careful distance was gone from it. Before I sign anything, I need to know something. She waited. Did you do all of this? He stopped. Started again. The docs, the disappearing, the 3 years, the companies. He looked at his hands for a moment, then back at her. Was any of it because you wanted to hurt me, or was it only because you had to? The question was not what she had prepared for. She had prepared for anger, negotiation threats, the deployment of whatever leverage he had calculated he could bring to bear. She had not prepared for that question, asked in that tone, by a man who looked like he actually needed the answer. She opened her mouth to give him the strategic answer, the one that served the outcome she had built toward the one that kept the distance intact and the structure clean. And then Nora's voice came through the intercom. Ms. Hartwell, I am sorry to interrupt. There are 3 men in the lobby. They do not have appointments, and they are asking for Mr. Voss. Nora's voice changed on the last sentence in a way that made Nora's spine go straight. Roman was already standing. He moved to the interior glass wall that looked out over the open plan area and down to the lobby visible through the atrium, and looked down. And something happened in his face that she had never seen before. A swift, total absence of the controlled surface. How did they know you were here, she said. She knew immediately from his expression that these men were not his. I was followed. He said it without inflection, already scanning the office layout. I made a mistake. What kind of mistake? He looked at her, the Draken Group. They have been rebuilding for 2 years. They know I have been looking for you, and they have been waiting for me to find you. He said the next part with a precision that felt like the most honest thing he had ever said to her directly. I led them here. I am sorry. For 1 second, the whole construction, she had built the office, the name, the 3 years of careful, precise work felt very fragile. She could feel it the way you feel a structure when the ground shifts under it. Then she felt something else. Cold, clear, functional. How many in the building, she said. Nora said 3 in the lobby. There will be more outside. Roman was already moving toward her desk, assessing the office layout with the rapid calculation of a man doing threat geometry. Nora. Code 7, Nora said into the intercom. Get everyone out through the east stairs now. Do not call the police yet. Yes, ma'am. She heard the controlled movement begin outside the glass wall. Nora's voice efficient and low. The sound of chairs pushing back. The particular quality of people who had been trained for exactly this, moving into the protocol she had quietly built into this office's operational structure 18 months ago. She picked up the 2 documents from her desk and put them in the interior pocket of her jacket. She looked at Roman. West stairwell, she said. 6 floors down to the service level. There is a parking structure with an exit onto Commerce. Gray Volvo on level 2, spot 44. She held out the key card. Go. He did not move. He was looking at her with a directness that had no management in it, no surface. You built a contingency for this, he said. I built contingencies for several things. You knew this could happen. I knew my work would have consequences. I planned accordingly. She held the key card out again. Roman, go. He took the card. His fingers touched hers when he took it. A brief incidental contact, the kind that carried no intention and somehow still cost something. Then they moved. The west stairwell was clean. They went down in a controlled descent, her shoulder protesting the pace in the particular way it always protested sudden movement, and she put her hand against the railing and managed it and kept moving because management was what she did. They reached the service level in 4 minutes. The parking structure was dim and smelled of concrete and exhaust, and she moved quickly to level 2 with Roman a half step behind her, checking corners with the instinctive pattern of someone whose body had been trained for this. Spot 44. The gray Volvo sat where she had left it that morning, anonymous, reliable, full tank, because she had made a habit of keeping a full tank since the February morning 3 years ago when she had left Chicago on a bus. He got in the driver's side. She got in the passenger seat because her shoulder would make driving painful and because she was already on her phone. Who are you calling? He said, pulling out of the spot. Someone who needs to know my location has been compromised, she said. And someone else who is going to file a very specific set of documents with a federal repository in the next hour as a precautionary measure. He glanced at her. The Volvo moved toward the Commerce Street exit, smooth and unhurried, because the only thing worse than being followed was being followed while moving fast. That is the commission documentation, he said. The package you were going to use Monday. It is going into the repository as insurance, not as a filing, she said. It only becomes accessible if something happens to me. She looked at him steadily. So it would be in your interest and in the interest of anyone connected to you to make sure nothing happens to me. The silence in the car was different from the silence in the office. Smaller, more compressed. That is very smart, he said. I know. They drove. She made her calls, 2 of them, brief and specific. When she hung up, she put her phone in her jacket pocket and looked at the street and thought about what had just happened. The stairwell, the gray Volvo, Thursday morning traffic with Roman Voss's hands on the wheel, and 3 years of careful distance suddenly compressed to the width of a center console. None of that had been in the plan. Then her phone rang. Unknown number, Chicago area code. She answered. The voice on the other end said 4 words in the flat, specific tone of someone delivering information that had no softening possible. They have your father. The folder slipped from her fingers onto the floor of the car. She picked it up. She did this first before she said anything, before she processed anything. She picked up the folder and held it in her lap and pressed her hand flat against it because she needed something physical to press against. Then she said very quietly, "Say that again." The voice said it again. 4 words, same order, same tone. "Where?" she said. "We will be in touch with that. When you are back in Chicago tonight, come alone." A pause that contained something that was not quite amusement. "Leave the husband." The line went dead. She held the phone against her thigh and looked at the concrete pillar in front of the windshield and breathed through her nose in the careful, deliberate way she had learned in Doc Raines's apartment, with 2 bullets worth of damage in her body and the specific necessity of not coming apart. Roman had not moved. He was watching her with the complete attention of someone who had read the call from her face and was waiting. "The Draken Group has my father," she said. The quality of the silence in the car changed. "Chicago," she said. "Tonight." He was already reaching for the ignition. "Wait," she said. He stopped. She thought. She did it quickly and thoroughly, the way she had taught herself to think over 3 years of problems that required solutions built from limited materials under time pressure. She thought about Frank in whatever room the Draken Group had put him in. She thought about his 61-year-old body and the way he had looked at the table in his apartment with his hands around a cup of coffee he was not drinking. She thought about the arithmetic he had been doing on himself for years, the specific accounting of a man who knew the ledger was not going to balance. She was not going to shed him pay it. Not like this. They will kill him regardless. she said. It was not a question. She was thinking out loud in the specific, unsentimental way of someone who needed to see the actual shape of the problem. Probably, Roman said. His voice was level. He was not being cruel. He was matching her register because he understood that she needed accurate information, not managed information. They want me there for a reason that is not an exchange, she said. They want to remove you and the documentation simultaneously, he said. The repository filing? How far along is it? My lawyer has it. It goes into the system automatically at noon unless I send a cancellation code. He looked at the clock on the dash. 9:47. They do not know about the repository, she said. They know about the package as leverage the way I described it to you in the office. They think the documentation exists as a threat I control. They do not know it is already in motion. So they think killing you kills the threat. Yes. What do they actually want beyond removing me? She looked at the folder in her lap. The asset transfers. If I am dead and the transfers are contested, the 19 companies revert to disputed status. It could take years to resolve legally. During those years, the Draken Group could move into the vacuum they have been trying to establish in Chicago for 3 years. If the Voss operation is simultaneously destabilized by my documentation and by my acquisitions becoming legally contested, it is an opening. They use your organization's collapse to walk through the front door, he said. Yes. He was quiet for a moment. That is not a bad plan, he said with the specific dispassionate acknowledgement of someone who respected operational competence regardless of its source. No, she agreed, it is not. I need your people, she said. Whatever you have in Chicago that can be operational tonight. He was already on his phone. They drove to the airport while he made calls and she made calls, and the gray Volvo moved through Seattle traffic with the anonymous efficiency of a car that drew no attention. By the time they reached the airport, she had a partial framework. By the time they were on the plane, a charter, she had something closer to a plan. She sat across from him in the small cabin and laid it out. He listened without interrupting. When she was finished, he was quiet for a moment. The warehouse district on the South Lakefront, he said. That is where they will have him. It is where they staged from 3 years ago. I have been investigating the Draken Group for 2 years. I know their Chicago infrastructure better than they know I know it. He paused. I should have moved on them 6 months ago. I did not, because I was still trying to locate you before I started a war that might make you harder to find. She looked at him. You delayed a strategic operation, she said slowly. Because of me. He met her eyes. Yes. She processed this and put it in the category of things she would examine later, when there was a later. The South Lakeshore Warehouse District, she said. How specific can you get? Specific enough, I have a man who has been inside their operation for 14 months. Building 7, I can have a confirmed location within an hour of us landing. There is something you need to understand about tonight, she said. Tell me, my father goes home. That is the condition that does not move. She held his gaze. Everything else, the documentation, the companies, the resolution of everything between us, all of it is secondary to that. If I have to trade the folder for his life, I trade it. You would give up everything you built. I would give up the leverage, she said. The build stays. The 19 companies are legally mine. The documentation exists in the repository regardless. The leverage is a negotiating tool. My father is not. She breathed. I spent 3 years building this because the alternative was having nothing. I will not trade my father for leverage. That is the one thing I will not do. He looked at her for a moment. Understood, he said. The word was simple and complete, and she believed it. They landed at O'Hare at 4 in the afternoon, the city gray and cold under a sky that had not decided whether it was going to rain. Roman's people met them on the tarmac, 2 vehicles, 4 men. One of them handed Roman a phone. He looked at what was on it and handed it to her. An address, South Lakeshore Warehouse District Building 7. Frank had been there since approximately 10 that morning, which meant they had taken him before Roman had even arrived in Seattle, which meant this had been planned well in advance, and the lobby appearance had been both a message and a trigger. I need to go in first, she said. They said alone. If they see a Voss operation approaching the building before I am inside, they will not hold to any arrangement. I know, Roman said. He breathed. I am not letting you go in alone. You do not get to let me do anything. she said without heat, without emphasis, just fact. He looked at her. Something moved in his face. No, he said. You are right, I do not. He breathed. I am asking. Do not go in there alone. The distinction mattered. She acknowledged it with a slight nod. Give me 10 minutes inside before you move. She said, I will keep them talking. I need them focused on me and the documents, not on the perimeter. 10 minutes, he said. I know what you are doing. She looked at him once, then she got out of the car. Building 7 had a side entrance that was unlocked, which told her they had been watching for her and were ready. She pushed the door open and went inside. The interior was large and dim, the floor marked with the ghost outlines of industrial shelving long since removed. The light came from 4 standing lamps positioned to illuminate a specific area near the building's center. A deliberate arrangement, theatrical in the way that men who wanted to communicate control arranged things. Frank was in a chair in the center of the lit space. He was upright. She assessed this in the first second with the specific clinical attention of someone who needed accurate data before anything else. He looked at her when she came in, and something in his face did what faces do when they have been waiting in fear for a long time. And then the thing they were afraid would not come has come. She did not go to him yet. She stopped at the edge of the lit space and took inventory. 5 men visible, 2 near Frank, 1 at each lateral point of the warehouse. A 5th near the far wall, who was clearly the operational lead from the quality of how he held himself. Victor Drele. She recognized him immediately. The compact man from the wedding reception 3 years ago, the one who had sat at the table on the periphery of the ballroom and watched Roman with the eyes of a surveyor. The stillness was the same, the patience was the same. Only now she knew his name, and she knew what he had been planning at that reception, and she knew he had no idea who she was when he had been sitting at that table. She used that. Vivian Hartwell, he said. His accent was light Eastern European origin, smoothed by years of American operation. Or Nora Callahan, I have been reading your file. Then you know I prefer to get to the point. She said, the documents. He said, the full commission package. We want it, I know. You brought it. I brought the folder. What is in it is a different question. He looked at her steadily. We are not negotiating. You will want to, she said. Because at noon today, the package you are looking for was filed with a federal legal repository. It is already in the system. Killing me does not kill it. Killing my father does not kill it. She held his gaze. The only thing killing me accomplishes at this point is adding a murder charge to whatever else gets uncovered when that repository opens. The warehouse was very quiet. I recognize you, she said. You were at the wedding 3 years ago at the reception, sitting alone at a table near the east wall. You were watching Roman the way you watch something you intend to acquire. I noticed you then, and I am telling you now so that you understand the kind of attention you have been operating under. Something moved in Drell's face, a microsecond of recalibration. He had not expected that. She had needed him to not expect something, and that was the thing she had chosen. When does it open? He said finally. That depends on choices made in this building in the next few minutes. She said, my father goes home. That is the beginning and end of my position. Everything else is negotiable. He looked at Frank. He looked at her. He looked at the folder she had taken from her jacket and was holding in her right hand. He weighed the variables, the repository, the folder, the operation he had built toward for 3 years. 2 minutes, he said. He nodded to the man on Frank's left. The man cut the zip ties on Frank's wrists. Frank stood up slowly, the stiffness of a man who had been sitting in a cold warehouse chair for 8 hours, and he looked at his daughter with an expression that contained more apology than she had the capacity to receive right now. Door behind you, she said to him quietly. Go. Dell, Dad. She held his eyes. Go. He went. She listened to his footsteps cross the warehouse floor. The side door opened and closed. She breathed. She looked at Drell and understood, from the subtle repositioning of the 2 men who had been flanking Frank, moving slightly, adjusting their angles, that the calculation had completed and had not landed where she needed it to land. She had known this was a possible outcome. She had planned for it. She checked the time in her head. 6 minutes and 40 seconds inside. 3 minutes and 20 seconds remaining. Whatever you are about to do, she said clearly, you should know there are 12 Voss operatives on this building's perimeter right now. His smile did not reach his eyes. We know about Voss. Do you know about the sniper on the eastern roof? The smile stayed, but the stillness changed. Because I do not, she said. I am telling you what I was told. I do not know if it is accurate. I am suggesting you calculate whether it is worth finding out. 2 seconds. Then the far wall of the warehouse came apart. Not a bomb, a vehicle, a black SUV moving at speed through the corrugated steel panel, the sound of it enormous in the enclosed space dust and debris expanding outward in a wave that knocked the standing lamps sideways and plunged half the space into sudden shadow. The Draken men moved immediately, trained and fast, toward positions that told her they had a response protocol for exactly this. She was already moving too, not away from the chaos, but sideways toward the support column, 6 feet to her left, a column she had identified 20 seconds after entering the building and had been tracking her distance to ever since. She reached it and put her back to it and looked at the space. Roman's people were inside. She could hear them controlled movement, the specific sounds of trained men working a space, and underneath that, the sharper, more chaotic sounds of engagement positions being contested, the warehouse geography being claimed and disputed in the dark. She stayed at the column. She was not armed. She was operating in a space she did not control, and the worst thing she could do was become a moving target in the dark. The man who came around the column was one of the two who had been flanking Frank. He reached for her with his left hand, and she drove the heel of her right palm into the bridge of his nose with everything she had, which was not enormous, but was accurate, and the crack of impact was immediate. He staggered. She used the stagger to move laterally away from the column, keeping him between her and the wall. Her shoulder registered its objection, with the precision of something that had been making the same complaint for 3 years. She ignored it with the practiced efficiency of long familiarity. He recovered faster than she needed and came at her again. And she understood in that moment that this was not a situation she was going to win on physical terms. So she stopped trying to win on physical terms. She threw the folder past him into the open space of the warehouse where it skidded across the floor and came to rest in a patch of dim light from one of the toppled lamps. He looked at it. That was all she needed. She moved hard to his right and ran toward the center of the space, toward the sounds of Roman's people working the room, because the correct position was not near the wall in the dark, but in the middle of the controlled chaos being organized by people who were on her side. Something caught her from behind, a hand on her coat collar, brutal and efficient, yanking her backward off her feet. She hit the floor hard on her right side, the air going out of her, and lay there for 1 second that felt much longer. Then she rolled right away from where she had fallen, because lying still was the same as being a target. She got her right hand under her and pushed, and her lungs decided to participate again. And she got air rough and cold, tasting of dust and metal. She was on her knees when she heard Roman's voice. Not across the warehouse. Close. 6 feet, maybe less. The voice of a man who had been covering ground and had found the specific piece of ground he was looking for. Down, he said. She went flat. The shot was close enough that she felt it in her sternum before she heard it. A single precise report from somewhere above and to the right. The sniper on the eastern roof, which meant it had not been a bluff, which meant Roman had anticipated exactly this and had positioned exactly right. The man who had pulled her down by the collar did not get up. She lay on the warehouse floor for 2 seconds and breathed and took inventory. Right side impact, ribs bruised, possibly one cracked. Left shoulder radiating in the way it did when she had aggravated the scar tissue. Nothing structural, everything functional. She got up. Roman was beside her in the time it took her to stand his hand on her right arm, not supporting her, but checking her the specific, rapid physical assessment of someone looking for damage. I am fine, she said. You are bleeding. She looked at her right hand scraped from the floor. That is nothing. The shoulder is also nothing. She looked at the warehouse. The sounds of active engagement had diminished to something more controlled. Aftermath sounds, positions secured, space being cleared. How many? She said. We have Drail and 2 others. 2 are down. 1 got out through the west wall before we closed it. She thought about what 1 getting out meant. She checked the time in her head. The repository filing. She said, what time is it? He looked at his phone. 7:14. The filing had been in the system since noon. 7 hours. long enough to be irrevocable, regardless of what the one who escaped did with what he knew. She breathed. She walked to the folder still lying on the warehouse floor in the dim light from the toppled lamp. She picked it up, checked the contents, both documents intact. She stood in the warehouse with the folder in her hands and Roman 3 feet away, in the sounds of his people managing the aftermath all around her, and she thought about her father walking out the side door and whether he had found the car she had arranged for exactly that contingency. "We need to talk," she said. "Not here." "I know," he said. The car was warm. That was the first thing she noticed when she got in. The heat immediate and specific, the kind that came from a vehicle that had been running long enough to mean it. Someone had thought about that. She felt it in her hands when she folded them in her lap, the warmth coming back into her fingers slowly. Roman got in beside her. The driver pulled away from the warehouse district without being told where to go, which meant there was a destination already arranged, which meant Roman had planned for an aftermath even when the middle of it was still unresolved. She noted this, filed it. "My father," she said. "There is a car at his apartment," Roman said. "Two of my people. He is home. He has been home since 7:40. She absorbed this. "You arranged that without telling me." "I arranged it before we went into the warehouse. I thought it was likely he would get out, and I thought it was likely he would need someone outside to make sure he got home clean." She looked at the window. "Thank you," she said. The words were simple, and she meant them fully. They drove north along the lake. The water was dark to the right, always there, always the same. She had her phone out. Her lawyer had confirmed the repository filing at 12:04. Timestamp irrevocable. She put the phone away. She looked at the folder in her lap. The car had slowed. She looked out the window and recognized the North Shore, the gate of the Voss estate visible ahead, the stone wall and the bare winter trees beyond it. "Stop the car," she said. The driver stopped. They were idling outside the gate, the headlights on the stone. She looked at the estate, the limestone facade just visible beyond the trees, pale and solid in the dark, exactly as it had been on her wedding night. The same lake, dark and flat to her right. She thought about the east wing and the 11 pins and the chair by the window and the 30 words a day. She thought about what it would mean to go back inside. She was not the woman who had arrived here 3 years ago in a $14,000 dress with a dish towel reflex and 8 years of a feeling she had been talking herself into and out of. That woman had needed things she could not get from this estate or from this man or from any structure external to herself, and she had gone and gotten them by other means, and they were hers now, permanent and irrevocable, independent of every choice she made from this point forward. She knew who she was. She had the companies and the repository and the 8th floor office in Seattle, and a staff of 6 people who called her Ms. Hartwell and who trusted the structure she had given them. She had her own name chosen from the middle pages of a novel. She had her own chair chosen from a showroom on Pine Street. She was not in danger of losing herself. The question was whether what she was considering was wisdom or repetition. Whether the thing she felt in this car was the same thing she had felt at 19, standing at the edge of a room, watching a man she had no business loving, or whether it was something different, something that had been tested by real information, now filtered through 3 years of accurate seeing, earned the hard way and therefore trustworthy. "I am going to my father's apartment," she said. "I need to see him. Not tonight." She looked at Roman. "Not any of this. Tonight." He looked at her for a moment. She watched him work through the impulse to push against this and reach the understanding that pushing was the wrong move, had always been the wrong move, and that he was going to have to become a different kind of man if any of this was going to be worth anything. She watched him get there. "Okay," he said. She got out of the car. The cold came at her immediately, the lake wind, with its particular indifference. She stood beside the car for a moment and looked at the gate and the stone and the bare trees, and then she took out her phone and called a car and waited on the road outside the Voss estate until it came. When it arrived, she got in and told the driver the address and leaned her head back and closed her eyes. She slept for 11 minutes in the back of the car. She knew it was 11 minutes because she checked the time when she woke, and the arithmetic was simple. It was the deepest 11 minutes of sleep she could remember, the specific crashed-out sleep of a body that had been managing too much for too long, and had found a brief moment when management was not required. Her father's building was a three-story walk-up built in 1958, updated only in the way strictly necessary. She had the key still. She let herself in and climbed the stairs and knocked twice before using it. Frank opened the door before she finished knocking. He looked at her face. He looked at her hand. The scrape dried now. The shoulder she was holding, slightly careful. He stepped back from the door and let her in, and did not say anything because he was, for all his failures, a man who understood what his daughter needed and when to provide it by being quiet. She sat in the kitchen. The hot pot mark was still on the table. The chair she always sat in had a small tear in the vinyl at the top right corner that had been there for 10 years. The refrigerator made its sound. Frank put the kettle on. They sat together while the kettle heated, and she looked at the hot pot mark and thought about the years this table had held. The meals, the homework. The years after her mother was gone, when it had just been the two of them eating across from each other with the specific, imperfect, inarticulate love of people who had nobody else. "I am not angry at you," she said. "I was. For a while I was very angry, and I did not have the bandwidth to say so because I needed all of my energy for other things. But I want you to know that I am not anymore." She looked at the hot pot mark. "What you did, the debt, the arrangement, it put me in a situation that was wrong and dangerous, and you knew it, and you made the transaction anyway because you were afraid," she breathed. "But the situation is also what made me this. What I am now, what I can do now." She looked at him. "I am not saying the trade was worth it. I am saying it is complicated, and I am not carrying the anger anymore, because the anger stopped being useful, and I only carry things that are useful." He looked at her for a long moment. His eyes were red at the edges. "You are more than I deserve," he said. "I am exactly what I built myself to be." She said, "You do not get credit for it, and neither does he. It is mine." She held his eyes. "But you are my father. That is also mine. I am keeping it." He put his hand on the table between them, palm up. The gesture of a man with nothing to offer except the gesture. She put a rear hand over his. They sat like that for a while in the kitchen, with the kettle and the hot pot mark and the refrigerator sound and the specific weight of everything that had happened and everything that had been paid and everything that was still being decided. She stayed that night. She slept in her old room on a bed that was slightly too small under blankets that smelled like the specific combination of fabric softener, an old house that she associated more completely with safety than anywhere she had been since. And she slept for 9 hours without interruption, which was the longest she had slept in 3 years. In the morning, she sat at the kitchen table with Frank's coffee, which was too strong the way it had always been, and she took the divorce decree out of the folder and read it from beginning to end with the thorough attention she applied to all documents of consequence. It was clean. Her lawyer had done good work. The terms were equitable, the language precise, the legal architecture solid against any reasonable challenge. She set it on the table. She thought about what she had said in the car outside the estate, that she was not deciding tonight, that she needed time and distance. She had time. She had the rest of her life. The distance was the question. She had built distance for 3 years. She had shaped it into something functional and load-bearing, and used it to support the weight of everything she had constructed in its span. The distance was real, and it had served a real purpose, and she was not dismissing it. But structures were not the same as answers. She had known this and had chosen to let the work substitute for knowing it because the work was available and the answer was not. The answer was somewhere in the city, in a charcoal coat, with warehouse dust on the sleeve, waiting for a phone call she had not promised to make. She thought about the question he had asked her in the office before Nora's voice came through the intercom. "Was any of it because you wanted to hurt me or only because you had to?" She had not answered. The honest answer was not simple. The honest answer contained the antechamber and the heating vent, and his voice describing her function with the brisk economy of a man discussing weather. It contained the dock and the cold concrete and her wedding ring placed in a pool of her own blood. It contained 19 acquisition files and 3 years of the specific absorbing work of becoming someone no one had expected her to become. The honest answer also contained the sound of her name and his voice, thrown into the dark at the docks, and the fact that she had thought about that sound more than she had intended to for 3 years. She had made a rule 3 years ago about being honest with herself even when the honesty was inconvenient. She was not willing to break that rule now. She picked up her phone. She did not call Roman. She called her lawyer in Vancouver and told him to put the divorce decree in the inactive file. Not withdrawn, inactive. Available but not in motion. She hung up. She sat with Frank's coffee and looked at the hot pot mark on the table and felt the specific, uncomfortable, necessary feeling of a woman who has spent 3 years building a self strong enough to make a choice and is now making it without the protection of certainty, which is the only way any real choice is ever made. She flew back to Seattle 2 days later. Roman called on the fourth day. She let it ring twice before she answered, not as performance, but because she was finishing a calculation and she finished things she started. I am in Seattle, he said. I know, she said. She had known since the previous afternoon. I am not here to push, he said. I am here because I am done conducting this by phone. She looked at the partial view of the sound from the temporary office 4 floors below her usual space. There is a coffee place on 4th, she said. It opens at 7. I will be there at 7:15. A pause. Okay, he said. She hung up and looked at the water and thought about 7:15 and what she was going to say. She did not know what she was going to say. She was going to go find out. The coffee place on 4th was the kind of place that Seattle did well. Small, serious about what it served, the kind of light in the morning that made everything look like the beginning of something. She arrived at 7:12 and got a table near the window because she had always chosen positions with clear sight lines and she was not going to stop now. He came in at 7:15 exactly. He looked like a man who had slept badly and was not going to mention it, which she recognized as a form of dignity and noted accordingly. He got coffee and sat across from her and looked at her with a steadiness that had no performance in it. She had the folder. She set it on the table between them. The asset transfer is gone, she said. The 19 companies are in the public record and they are mine and no document between us changes that. I know, he said. The repository filing is permanent, she said. It is not leverage anymore. It is a fact. The documentation exists in a federal system, and if anything happens to me or to my father, or to anyone connected to me, it becomes accessible. That is permanent. That is not negotiable, and it is not personal. It is structural. I understand, he said. If you want to contest the acquisitions in court, you are entitled to try, she said. You will not succeed because the documentation of the legal process is thorough, but you are entitled to try. I am not going to contest them, he said. I know, she said. I am saying it because accuracy matters. He looked at her. What are you doing? I am establishing what is real, she said. Independently of what comes next, so that whatever comes next is built on accurate ground. He was quiet. I am not the woman from the antechamber anymore, she said. I am not going to come back and be the woman in the East Wing, watching and waiting and translating cruelty into something I can live with. That is gone. I am not capable of it anymore, and I would not do it if I were. I know, he said. If there is anything between us going forward, it is between people who see each other accurately, she said. It is between a man who understands specifically what he did wrong and why it was wrong, and a woman who has zero remaining capacity for being placed in a category and acted on. She looked at him steadily. That is the only ground on which this conversation has any future. He met her eyes. Those are my terms too, he said. I do not want the woman from the antechamber. I do not want anyone who requires managing or positioning. He said this with the flat, certain tone of his most honest register. I want the woman who walked into my office with no evidence and no leverage and told me the truth about Gerald because she thought I should know it. I want the woman who built 19 companies in 3 years and tore the asset transfer in half because she did not need it anymore. He looked at her hands on the folder. I want the woman who is sitting across from me right now and has not once in this entire conversation said anything she did not mean. She looked at her coffee. I'm going to tell you something, he said, and I need you to let me finish before you respond. She waited. I know what I did, he said. I know what I said to Croft Hensley the night before the wedding. I know you heard it. He said this with the flat certainty of someone who had been through the calculation enough times to arrive at certainty. I have known since before you disappeared that you heard it. The vent in the antechamber. I should have checked it. I did not. She was very still. I'm not asking you to understand why I said what I said. He continued. The operational logic was real. I believed it when I said it. I also. He stopped. The careful architecture of his phrasing showed a crack. I was wrong about what you were. I categorized you before I knew you. I do that. I categorize people, and I act on the category, and I do not revise. Or I did not. The coffee place was filling up around them. The slow accumulation of a Seattle morning. In the 6 weeks you were in my house, he said, I learned things about you I did not expect to learn. The way you moved through the estate, the way you listened, the way you came to my office with what you had found about Gerald. No evidence, no leverage, nothing to gain from it. And told me anyway because you believed it was real and you thought I should know. He looked at his coffee. I dismissed you. I did it in the specific, efficient way I dismiss things that do not fit my categories. He looked at her directly. And then you were at the shipping docks. The silence stretched. I heard you leave, he said. The night you went to the docks, I was awake. I heard the east wing side door. He looked at her. I did not follow you. I told myself it was not relevant. I went back to sleep. Something moved through her chest that was not quite anger and not quite grief. Something older than both. And then at the docks, he said, you ran toward the gunman. I told you. Tactical decision. I know what you told me, he said. I know what tactical decisions feel like. What you did at those docks was not a calculation. She looked at the window and said nothing. I held your wedding ring, he said. I carried it in my jacket for 8 months every day until I understood that I was carrying it because I did not know how to put down something I should never have let go of in the first place. He stopped and she heard something in the stop that she had not heard from him before. A roughness at the edge of the control. I am not telling you because I expect it to change anything. I am telling you because you asked me to see you from the beginning. That was what you wanted, to be seen accurately as what you actually were. And I could not do it then. He looked at her directly. I am doing it now. She thought about the antechamber. Bench, 11 pins in her hair. She thought about the notebook in the library and the gray Volvo with the full tank and 19 acquisition files and Vivian Hartwell proprietor. She thought about what it had cost her to build all of this. The shoulder that ached in cold weather. The nights in furnished rooms. The specific grinding loneliness of becoming someone new in a city where no one knew what she had left behind. She reached into her jacket and took out the folder. She opened it and looked at the 2 documents. Then she looked at Roman and she said the thing she had been carrying for 3 years that was neither strategy nor sentiment, but something more fundamental than either. The thing she would have given anything not to still feel and could not. The answer to your question, she said, is both. He was completely still. I needed to do it, she said, and I wanted to. She looked at the documents. I wanted to because of what you said through that vent, because of the way you looked at me at the altar, like I was a delivery that had arrived on time, because of Iris Langley in the green dress and 30 words a day in the East Wing. She breathed. And because I had loved you for 8 years and you never once looked at me like I was a person. And when I finally mattered enough for you to notice me, it was as a piece of operational equipment. She stopped. Her voice was steady. She was going to keep it steady. But I also needed to do it, she said, because it was the only way I could become this. She looked at the folder, the window, the city outside, the person sitting in this chair. I could not have become this without the thing I was responding to. I needed the anger, and I needed the work, and I needed the distance, and I needed to prove to myself, only to myself, that I was not the woman he described through that vent. That I was never that woman. That the category was wrong from the beginning. She closed the folder. And now I have proved it, she said. To myself, conclusively. She looked at him. So here we are. He looked at the folder. He looked at her face. He was quiet for a moment. I have spent 3 years looking for you, he said. Not to recover the companies. Not for the organization. Not for any operational reason. His voice was steady, but the steadiness was costing him something, and she could hear it. Because you left a ring on a dock and disappeared. And I understood in that moment standing there that I had thrown away the only person who had ever seen me accurately and acted on what they saw regardless of the personal cost. She looked at her coffee. I know, he said. I know it does not change what I did. I know it does not erase the antechamber or the dismissal or 6 weeks of treating you like furniture. I know the accounting of that does not resolve in my favor. I am not asking you to forgive a debt. I am telling you something true about what the last 3 years have been for me because you told me something true and you deserve the same. Maddox, she said quietly. And then she stopped because the name that had come out was not the name she used for him in this office, in this life, and she felt the slip of it land between them, like an admission. Roman, she said, precisely. Something crossed his face that was not a smile but was in the same territory. He did not comment on it. He simply waited because he understood that she was not finished. What happened at the docks, she said. What I did, it does not make us even. What I built in 3 years does not make us even. What you just told me does not make us even. There is no version of even that applies to what this was. I know. Then you understand why I need you to hold the document. She took the divorce decree from the folder. She looked at it for a long time. The thing about decisions made in the light of accurate information was that they were clean in a way that decisions made in the dark never were. She had made a decision in the antechamber in the dark. She had spent 3 years acquiring accurate information. She set the divorce decree on the table and slid it across to him. He looked at it. That stays in your possession, she said. Not filed, not destroyed, yours. She held his gaze. If at any point the terms I described stop being the reality of what this is, I want you to have that in your hand ready, not as punishment, as a record of what we agreed to and what happens when agreements are not kept. He looked at the document. He picked it up with both hands and looked at it the way you look at something that has real weight. Okay, he said. She breathed. The coffee place was warm around them, and the morning was doing what mornings did, moving forward without asking permission. And outside the window, Seattle went through its business with the indifferent continuity of cities, and the sound was gray and wide and going nowhere. She opened her laptop. I have a 9 o'clock, she said. I know, he said. I will be here when you are done. She looked at him once more. The directness returned, received, held between them without requiring anything further from either of them. And then she looked at her screen and she went back to work. The frightened young woman who had once stood in an antechamber in a $14,000 dress and heard herself described as disposable was not entirely gone. She was still in here somewhere, smaller now, quieter, filed in the same place as the 11 pins lined up on the vanity table and the hot pot mark on the kitchen table in the Southside apartment. The record of what it had cost to arrive at this, but she was no longer in charge. Vivian Hartwell was in charge. The woman who had built 19 companies and walked into a warehouse with nothing but a folder and her own nerve and had come out the other side with her father and her structure and her name intact. The woman who had just slid a divorce decree across a coffee shop table, not as surrender and not as victory, but as the most honest thing she knew how to do, which was to tell the truth about what she wanted and trust that the ground she had built was solid enough to hold whatever came next. She typed the first line of her 9 o'clock preparation and felt the work settle around her like something familiar and trustworthy. Outside, Seattle moved through its morning. The sound was gray and flat and enormous. And the light was doing what winter light does when it finally decides to show up, arriving sideways without ceremony, illuminating everything exactly as it was. The woman who had once been described as disposable was now the only person in the room who decided what happened next. She always had been. The world had simply taken 3 years to look in the right direction. She had been there the whole time.